The 34th session of the Senate in the third regular session of the 16th Congress is hereby called to order. Senator Cynthia Aguilar Villar will lead the chamber in prayer.
As we mark November as the National Rice Awareness Month, I would like to offer a prayer for farmers from whom we depend on food. Let us lift them up to God as well as the land they plow and the work of their hands. Lord of creation, you take care of the earth and water it, making it rich and fertile. The river of God has plenty of water. It provides a bountiful harvest of grain, for you have ordered it so. You drench the plowed ground with rain. You soften the earth with showers and bless its abundant crops. The grasslands of the wilderness become a lush pasture, and the fields are carpeted with grain. They all shout and sing for joy, and we do as well as we say thank you for the harvest. We also pray for those who grow, prepare, and distribute the food we eat. We hold before you those who produce, often receiving scant reward for their labor and their investment in land and equipment. Loving God, we pray for all who are involved in harvesting resources, in agriculture and horticulture, forestry, and fisheries. Their work is often beset with uncertainty through weather, pest, and disease. We pray for those whose livelihoods have been ruined by the recent disaster. Help us to help them recover. May they know that the community they serve stands alongside with them in their need. We ask this in your name, Lord of creation. Amen.
Amen. The Secretary will call the roll.
Roll call of members. The Honorable Senators Angara, Aquino, Binay, Cayetano Alan Peter Compañero S, Cayetano Pia S, Defensor Santiago, Ejercito, Enrile Escudero, Estrada, Gingona, Hunasan, Lapid, Legarda, Marcos, Smeña, Pimentel, Po, Recto, Revilla, Soto, Trillanes, Villar, Senate President Drilon.
15 senators answered the roll call. The chair declares the presence of the quorum. The acting majority leader is recognized.
Mr. President, I move that we dispense with the reading of the Journal of the 33rd Session, 3rd of November, 2015, and consider the same as approved.
Any objection? Hearing none. The reading of the journal of the previous session is hereby dispensed with, and the same is hereby approved.
Mr. President, I move that we proceed with the reference of business.
Secretary will read the reference of business.
Messages of the President of the Philippines. Letter of His Excellency President Benigno Aquino III, dated 1 October 2015, submitting for the Senate's consideration and concurrence the agreement between the Republic of the Philippines and the Federal Republic of Germany on Social Security, which was signed on 19 September 2014 in Germany.
Committee on Foreign Relations.
Letter of His Excellency President Benigno Aquino III, dated 8 October 2015, certifying to the necessity of the immediate enactment of House Number 6135, entitled an Act establishing the Coconut Farmers and Industry Trust Fund and providing for its management and utilization. Trust fund derived from all coconut levy assets and which shall be used exclusively for the development of the coconut industry for the ultimate benefit of poor and marginalized coconut farmers and farm workers.
Committee on Rules.
Messages from the House of Representatives. Letter from the Speaker of the House of Representatives designating Representative Rodriguez as House Member to the Congressional Oversight Committee on Automated Election System. Vice Representative Sarmiento, effective 29 September 2015.
Committee on Rules.
Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 2 October 2015 it concurred with the Senate amendments to House Number 4484, entitled Act creating 2 additional branches of the Regional Trial Court in the province of Ilocos Sur to be stationed in the city of Bigan and in the municipality of Santo Domingo, further amending for the purpose Section 14, Paragraph A, Batas Pambansa Bilang 129, otherwise known as the Judiciary Organization of 1980, is amended, appropriating funds therefore.
To the archives.
Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 5 October 2015 it designated Representatives Cojuangco, Treñas, and Paquis as conferees to the Bicameral Conference Committee on disagreeing votes of House Number 4261 entitled An Act Converting the Bacau Elementary School in Barangay Bacau, Municipality of Manduria, Iloilo City into an integrated school to be known as Bacau Integrated School and appropriating funds therefore.
To the Committee on Rules.
Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 7 October 2015 it ratified the Conference Committee report on the disagreeing provisions of House Number 5831 entitled An Act Enhancing the Current Tax System by Implementing Measures that Ensure Transparency in the Management and Accounting of Tax Incentives Granted to Government and Non-Government Entities and for Other Purposes, and Senate Number 2669 entitled An Act Instituting a System for Tax Incentives Management and Transparency and for Other Purposes.
To the Archives.
Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 8 October 2015, it designated Representatives Collantes, Paez, Guanlao, Noel, and Pakis as conference to the Bicameral Conference Committee on Disagreeing Provisions of House Number 6007 entitled An Act Providing for the Creation and Organization of Credit Surety Fund Cooperatives to manage and administer credit surety funds to enhance accessibility of micro, small, and medium entrepreneurs, cooperatives, and non-government organizations to the credit facilities of banks, and Senate Number 2909, An Act Providing for the Creation and Organization of Credit Surety Fund Cooperatives to manage and administer credit surety funds to enhance the accessibility of micro, small, and medium entrepreneurs, cooperatives, and non-government organizations to the credit facility of banks and for other purposes.
Committee on Rules.
Letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 9 October 2015, it passed the following House bills in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. House Number 5583, An Act renewing for another 25 years the franchise granted to Masbate Community Broadcasting Company, Inc. under RA Number 7510 entitled An Act granting the Masbate Community Broadcasting Company, Inc. a franchise to construct, install, operate, and maintain radio and television broadcasting stations in the islands of Masbate and Romblon and the whole of the Visayas and for other purposes. House Number 5859, An Act renewing for another 25 years the franchise granted to People's Broadcasting Service, Inc. under RA 7477 as amended by RA 9213. House Number 6011, An Act granting Veritas Media Arts, Inc. a franchise to construct, install, establish, operate, and maintain radio and television broadcasting stations in the province of Bohol and the Visayas. And House Number 6053, An Act renewing for another 25 years the franchise granted to Zoe Broadcasting, Inc., amending for the purpose Republic Act Number 7297 entitled An Act granting the Zoe Broadcasting Network, Inc. a franchise to construct, install, operate, and maintain radio and television broadcasting stations throughout the Philippines and for other purposes, amended by RA 7968.
Committee on Rules.
Public Services.
Sorry. We made a mistake, which we referred to the Committee on Public Services.
Bills on first reading. Senate Number 2988, An Act creating the Office for the Protection of Electricity Consumers and appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes by Senator Paolo Benigno Bamaquino IV.
Committee on Trade, Commerce, Entrepreneurship, Energy, and Finance.
Senate Number 2989, Act providing for a Magna Carta for workers in the energy sector of the Philippines, authorizing the collection and appropriation of funds therefore and for other purposes by Senator Paolo Benigno Bamaquino IV.
Energy, Civil Service, Government Organization, Professional Regulation, and Finance.
Senate Number 2991, An Act to establish an interagency coordinating committee that will address the problem of underage drinking, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Health and Demography, Youth, and Finance.
Senate Number 2992, Equal Credit Opportunity Act, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Banks, Financial Institutions, Currencies, Justice, and Human Rights.
Senate Number 2993, An Act directing the Department of Education to integrate the historical and analytical account of the Philippines' rescue of Jewish refugees in the 1930s as part of the coverage of Philippine history subject taught to grade 5 and 6 students in all national and regional schools in the country and for other purposes, introduced by Senator Enrile.
Education, Arts and Culture, Finance.
Resolutions. PS Resolution Number 1613, expressing the sense of the Senate to nominate Juan Od Ogay as a Gawad sa Manlilikan ng Bayan Gamaba or National Living Treasures awardee in accordance with RA 7335, otherwise known as the Manlilikan ng Bayan Act by Senator Maria Lourdes Nancias Binay.
Rules.
Yes, Resolution Number 1614, directing the proper Senate Committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation on the report that the Department of Interior and Local Government Central Office building worsens traffic along EDSA, Senator Defensor Santiago.
Public Services.
PSR 1615, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation in the Commission on Audit report that the Philippine Postal Savings Bank, Inc. failed to foreclose on the collaterals of past due accounts amounting to 297.176 million pesos in 2014, resulting in delayed exercise of ownership over the property and recovery of investments.
Banks, financial institutions, and currencies.
PS 1616, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry of legislation. The Commission on Audit report that found irregularities in advertising contracts worth a total of 1.2 billion pesos entered into by the government.
Tourism.
PSR 1617, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation. The report that the Commission Audit flagged the Metro Manila Development Authority for its beautification of Pasay City on the set to be demolished and purchase of fishing boats for victims Eastern Samar, Santiago. PSR number 1618, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in the recent COA report that the Trade and Investment Corporation of the Philippines failed to collect a significant amount of loan receivables, thus depriving it of
Government operations and public enterprises.
PSR number 1619, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry on the granting to the Bugkalot Ilonggot cultural communities of percentage shares in the proceeds of the Kaseknan multipurpose
Cultural communities and finance.
PSR 1620, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation. The Commission on Audit report on suspended deficient infrastructure programs
Public
of Longa
Works.
City. PSR 1629, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry on the report that 688 million pesos in Conat Farm rehabilitated deals were awarded to public
Accountability of public officers and investigations, agriculture and food.
PSR 1622, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry in aid of legislation. The Commission on Audit report that the city government of Parañaque loses some 400 million pesos in real property taxes yearly due to the outdated scheduled fair market values, failure to conduct the revision of real property assessments, and as of the end of 2014, lost 169 million social housing project by Central Defensor
Local government.
PSR number 1623, directing the proper Senate committee to conduct an inquiry of legislation about the desired economic policy direction of the Philippines with regard to foreign participation in the ownership and operation of corporation firms engaged in the business of construction of buildings and other infrastructure in the Philippines. Senator Marcos Jr.
Economic affairs.
Communications letters from the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas transmitting to the Senate copies of the following certified and authenticated BSP issuances in compliance with Section 15A of RA 7653, Circular Letter Number CL 2015-57, 58, and 59, 21, and 20 September 2015.
Banks, financial institutions, and currencies.
Committee report number 286, prepared and submitted jointly by the Committees on Health and Demography, Social Justice, Welfare, Rural Development, Ways and Means, Youth, and Finance, on Senate number 2990 with Senators Defensor Santiago, Cayetano P., Legarda, Cynthia A. Villar, Sani Angara, Lapid, Grace Poe, and Gingona III as authors thereof, entitled Act promulgating a comprehensive policy in addressing the needs of persons with rare disease, recommending its approval and substitution of Senate numbers 1868, 2098, 2279, 2383, and 247, taking into consideration PSR numbers 865 and 1584, 3 September 2014, privilege speech of Cayetano P. and House number 5973, sponsors Senators Cayetano P. and Gingona III.
Calendar for ordinary business.
Additional reference of business, message from the House of Representatives, letter from the House of Representatives informing the Senate that on 9 October 2015, it passed the following House bills in which it requests the concurrence of the Senate. House number 4148, an act recognizing the annual observance of World Teachers' Day, declaring for the purpose the 5th day of October every year as National Teachers' Day in the Philippines.
Rules.
House 4201, an act granting Philippine citizenship to Muhammad Wasim Nana.
Justice and Human Rights.
House number 5412, an act making election service non-compulsory for public school teachers, providing for compensation and other benefits.
Electoral Reforms, People Participation, Finance.
House number 5525, an act modernizing the Customs and Tariff Administration.
Ways and Means.
House number 5875, an act amending Republic Act 7615, entitled the New Central Bank Act.
Banks, financial institutions, and currencies. Ways and Means, Finance.
House number 6013, an act establishing the forest land boundary of the province of Surigao del Sur.
Environment, Natural Resources, Finance.
House number 6077, an act regulating the practice of nutrition and dietetics in the Philippines and appropriating funds, therefore repealing for the purpose Presidential Decree numbered 1286, otherwise known as the Nutrition Dietetics Decree of 1977.
Civil Service, Government Organization, and Professional Regulation, Finance.
House Number 6107, anak, authorizing wiretapping in cases involving violations of RA 9165, otherwise known as the Comprehensive Dangerous Act of 20 or Dangerous Drugs Act of 2002, amending for the purpose Section 3 of RA 4200, entitled An Act to Prohibit and Penalize Wiretapping and Other Related Violations to the Privacy of Communication and for other purposes.
Committee on Public Order, Dangerous Drugs, National Defense and Security.
House Number 6112, an act rationalizing the powers, duties, and accountabilities of the Social Security Commission for the amending for the purpose RA 1161 amended by RA 8282, otherwise known as the Social Security Act of 1997.
Government corporations and public enterprises, labor, employment, human resource development.
House Number 6131, an act providing for the establishment of a technical education skills development center in the municipality of Rizal, province of Occidental Mindoro, known as the Rizal Occidental Mindoro TESDA Training and Accreditation Center, and appropriating funds therefore.
Labor, employment, human resources development, finance.
House Number 6135, an act establishing the Coconut Farmers and Industry Trust Fund and providing for its management and utilization.
Agriculture and food.
House Number 6138, an act exempting from the land area requirement a province proposed to be created if it is composed of one or more islands, amending for the purpose Section 461B of RA 7160, amended, otherwise known as the Local Government Code of 1991.
Local government.
House Number 6139, Act creating a barangay to be known as Barangay Care in the city of Tarlac, province of Tarlac.
Local government, electoral reforms, and people's participation.
House Number 6140, an act separating the city of San Fernando from the 3rd Legislative District of the province of Pampanga to constitute the lone legislative district of the city of San Fernando.
Local government, electoral reforms, people's participation.
House Number 6142, an act establishing a state polytechnic college in the municipality of Cabayan, province of Benguet, to be known as the Cabayan State Polytechnic College, and appropriating funds therefore.
Education, arts and culture, ways and means, finance.
House Number 6143, an act converting the Carlos Hilado Memorial State College in the city of Talisay, Negros Occidental into a state university to be known as the Carlos Hilado State University, and appropriating funds therefore.
Education, arts and culture, ways and means, finance.
House Number 6144, an act establishing the University of Science and Technology of Southern Philippines, USTSP, providing for the purpose the amalgamation of the Mindanao University of Science and Technology and the Misamis Oriental State College of Agriculture and Technology, and appropriating funds therefore.
Education, arts and culture, ways and means, finance.
House Number 6148, an act increasing the penalties for the crime of slander by deed and including the intentional filing of a false complaint in court or with any government agency exercising quasi-judicial or administrative powers as one of its forms, amending for the purpose Article 359 of Act Number 3815, otherwise known as the Revised Penal Code.
Justice and human rights, civil service, government organization, professional regulation.
House Number 6152, an act declaring the province of Batanes as a responsible community-based cultural heritage and ecotourism zone.
Environment and natural resources.
House Number 6153, an act reclassifying certain portions of forest land in Barangay Cumbado, Maasin City, Southern Leyte into agricultural land.
Environment and natural resources.
House Number 6155, an act establishing a national high school in Barangay San Roque, Zamboanga City, to be known as San Roque National High School, and appropriating funds therefore.
Education, arts and culture, finance.
House Number 6173, an act increasing the bed capacity of the Eversley Child Sanitarium Hospital in the province of Cebu from 50 to 100, upgrading its service facilities and professional health care, appropriating funds therefore.
Health and demography, finance.
House Number 6174, an act converting the Dr. Fernando Biduran Senior Memorial Hospital, formerly Sorsogon Provincial Hospital in the province of Sorsogon, from secondary to tertiary level hospital under the full administrative and technical supervision of the Department of Health, increasing its bed capacity from 100 to 250 and appropriating funds therefore.
Health and demography, finance.
House Number 6175, an act establishing modified mariculture development parks in suitable areas in the 1st District of Sulu, authorizing municipal local government units to manage the parks and appropriating funds therefore.
Agriculture and food, finance.
House Number 6180, an act adjusting the amounts or the value of property on which a penalty is based and the fines imposed under the Revised Penal Code, amending for the purpose Act Number 3815, otherwise known as the Revised Penal Code as amended.
Human rights. Justice and human rights.
House Number 6184, an act strengthening the Mindanao State University system and appropriating funds therefore.
Education, Arts, Culture, Ways and Means.
House Number 6196, ang establishing the Kalanguya Center for the 6th District of Pangasinan, 1st District of Nueva Ecija in the provinces of Ifugao, Benguet, and Nueva Vizcaya, and appropriating funds therefore.
Cultural Communities and Finance.
And House Number 6198, entitled an act creating the Department of Information and Communications Technology, defining its powers and functions, appropriating funds therefore and for other purposes.
Committee on Rules.
Bill on first reading, Senate Number 2994, an act restructuring the income brackets and rates of tax imposed on taxable income of individuals, amending for the purpose sections 24, 32, 33, 34, 35 of the 1997 National Internal Revenue Code of the Philippines, amended by Senator Grace Poe.
Ways and Means.
Ask for a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President. 1-minute suspension, Mr. President.
1 minute suspension.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, we are in receipt of the Conference Committee report on the conflicting provisions of Senate Bill number 2401 and House Bill number 6043 on SK reform. Copies of the report have been distributed to the senators. So, Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we consider the aforesaid Conference Committee report.
Any objection? Hearing none. Consideration of the joint explanation of the Bicameral Conference Committee report on the disagreeing provision of Senate Bill number 2401 and House Bill 6043 is in order.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Marcos, to present the Bicameral Conference Committee report.
Senator Marcos is recognized to present to the Chamber the Bicameral Conference Committee report.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as chairman of the Committee on Local Government, I have the honor to report to the plenary the bicameral conference committee report on the disagreeing provisions of Senate Bill 2401 and House Bill 6043 on the proposed Sangguniang Kabataan Reform Act. The bicameral conference committee hearing was held last October 6, 2015. The report is fairly lengthy, Mr. President. It's a 10-page report. So may I respectfully request that the BICAM report be considered read into the records of the Senate and be included in the records of the Senate.
Any objection? Hearing none, the 10-page joint explanation of the bicameral conference committee report on the disagreeing provisions of 2401 and House Bill 6043 is hereby read into the records.
Thank you, Mr. President. May I now move for the ratification of the bicameral report on the Committee on the Disagreeing Provisions of the Senate Bill 2401 and House Bill number 6043 or the SK Reform Act.
There is a motion that the Chamber ratifies the bicameral conference committee report on the disagreeing provisions of SBN 2401 and House Bill 6043. Copies of this report has been distributed to all the members of the Chamber. Is there any objection? The Senator from Quezon City, Senator Soto, is recognized.
Mr. President, it grieves my heart to register an abstention when you count the votes and reserve the right to submit an explanation of why I am abstaining.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The Secretary, the records of the Senate will reflect the abstention of Senator Soto on this report. Senator Escudero seeks to be recognized. What is the pleasure of the gentleman from Sorsogon?
Mr. President, may I ask for a minute suspension just to go over the copy because it's the first time that I will be seeing a copy and the explanation was merely read into the records. Literally, Mr. President, not a parliamentary minute, but literally 1 minute.
Suspension for 1 minute.
Happy birthday kay Pete. Nabasa ko. Birthday niya kailan yesterday. Yesterday, remember, I don't know her number or
Big bill.
Session is resumed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank the distinguished sponsor for affording this representation, as well as Senator Rector, ample time to go over the BICAM report with him, as well as with Senator Aquino. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Senator Marcos.
There is a pending motion for the ratification of the bicameral conference committee report. Is there any objection? Hearing none. The abstention of Senator Soto is placed of record, and the Secretary is directed to enter into the records the affirmative votes of 16 other senators present in the session today, and therefore the Chair declares the bicameral conference committee report on the disagreeing provisions of Senate Bill number 2401 and House Bill 6043 as duly ratified. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we transfer Senate Bill number 2990 under Committee Report number 286 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders. This is the committee report on persons with rare disease, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Senate Bill 2990 under Committee Report 286 is hereby transferred from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
With the consent of the Senate, Mr. President, I move that we consider Senate Bill number 2990 under Committee Report number 286.
Any objection? Hearing none. In order.
With the permission of the body, I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
An act promulgating a comprehensive policy and addressing the needs of persons with rare disease.
Mr.
Majority
President,
Leader.
I move that we recognize Senator Pia Cayetano to sponsor the measure.
Senator Cayetano is recognized to sponsor the measure.
Mr. President, a minute suspension to prepare the PowerPoint, the Presi presentation.
1 minute suspension.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, esteemed colleagues, the right of every person to proper health care is espoused in the 1987 Constitution, which declares that the state shall protect and promote the right to health of the people and instill health consciousness among them. It further mandates that the state shall adopt an integrated and comprehensive approach to health development, which shall endeavor to make essential goods, health, and other social services available to all the people at affordable cost. There shall be priority for the needs of the underprivileged, sick, elderly, disabled women, and children. Today, I rise to sponsor Senate Bill number 2990 under Committee Report number 286, or the Rare Disease Act. Rare disease, otherwise known as orphan disorder, is any health condition resulting from genetic defects that rarely affect the general population. There are between 7,000 and 8,000 rare diseases that are known, and less than 400 approved treatment for them. 75% of rare diseases affect children. The Philippine Registry of Rare Diseases at the Institute of Human Genetics revealed 41 diseases affecting 300 diagnosed patients in the country, while many more remain undiagnosed. The thing about rare diseases is that they are often chronic, debilitating, and life-threatening. The quality of life of patients is compromised by loss of autonomy. Parents and their families experience a high level of pain and suffering, and the cost of treatment is often beyond the means of most families. Rare disease is particularly close to my heart. I lost my son at 9 months to complications from a rare congenital disease called trisomy 13. Trisomy 13 is just one of the many rare diseases. In the Senate here today are some brave persons living with rare diseases. Princess Paula Javete is 9 years old and living with Moebius syndrome, a rare neurological disorder that leaves patients unable to move certain muscles in their faces. Although there is no definitive treatment for Moebius syndrome, physical, occupational, and speech therapy may be beneficial for patients. 18-year-old Roseanne Ibay has osteogenesis imperfecta, or brittle bone disease, in which bones break easily. Management of this disease may include rehab medicine, orthopedic therapy, dental care, and hearing loss treatment. Joaida Ziv Morejon is 17 years old. She has blue rubber bleb nevo syndrome, which is a rare disorder frequently associated with serious and potentially fatal bleeding and anemia. Treatment may include blood transfusions and sirolimus for severe bleeding. 26-year-old Michael Kapokian also joins us today. He is living with MPS type 2 Hunter syndrome, which symptoms may include enlarged liver and spleen, stiff joints, cardiac disease, and prolonged neurological involvement, leading to developmental delays and regression. To treat this rare disease, patients may need to undergo bone marrow transplant or enzyme replacement therapy. And we have Juan Magdaraog, who is 38 years old and living with Pompe disease, which is a disorder that disables the heart and skeletal muscles. Pompe disease eventually renders a person weak, needing the help of people and equipment to go on with their daily activities. For Juan, this disease started when he was just 10 years old, when he started having trouble getting up from the floor and climbing stairs. Many did not expect to live him past the age of 30, but he is now 38 years old and in a wheelchair and reliant on a breathing machine. He finished school, obtained a degree in industrial design, and is now gainfully employed. Sadly, Mr. President, many others who are afflicted with rare disease do not have ready access to the treatment and support they need. These diseases are medically and economically catastrophic. Medically, because they progress to multiple disability or multiple organ failure, which without help lead to early death. And economically, because the cost of care is too high and can push a patient and his family to poverty. Under the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs, of the United Nations General Assembly, one of our global goals is to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all ages. As we currently stand, the Philippines has yet to include the rare disease sector in mainstream public health programs, despite studies suggesting that 11.2% of child mortality in the Philippines being caused by birth defect and congenital anomalies attributed to rare diseases. Mr. President, it is time we include the rare disease sector in our public health policy, because health is a human right and universal health care means that nobody is left behind. We need a policy that will address the plight of persons affected by rare disease and their families. The proposed bill, which was ably crafted and prepared by Dr. Padilla, now Chancellor of UP Manila, will establish a health delivery system that is comprehensive, permanent, and sustainable for the benefit of the rare disease sector. It also seeks the inclusion of rare disease treatment in the health benefit package of PhilHealth and the inclusion of medical assistance to persons with rare diseases as provided by RA 10351, or the Sin Tax Law. Finally, it lays down regulatory and fiscal incentives to support research and development, import, and manufacture of orphan drugs and products. Mr. President, on a policy level, this is a health bill which aims to reduce child mortality and reduce poverty. However, for the Filipinos who are directly affected by this condition, this measure will relieve some of the economic burden of managing rare diseases. More importantly, they can hope for better quality of life for the ones they love. With that, I earnestly seek the swift passage of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Cayetano. Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2990 under Committee Report number 286.
So suspended.
Ask for a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President.
Suspended for 1 minute.
Ready to resume, Mr. President.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we recognize Senator Lauren Legarda to speak on a matter of public interest.
Senator Lauren Legarda is recognized on a question of public interest.
Thank you, Mr. President. 3 weeks ago, Typhoon Lando, or Kopu, battered Luzon provinces. It lingered over the country for a week, affecting more than 3 million Filipinos, causing damage to agriculture and infrastructure worth 11 billion pesos. With ongoing post-disaster efforts for Lando survivors, we received reports that huge amounts of disaster funds, particularly 81% of the Quick Response Funds, or the QRF, for 2015, remain unutilized, prompting your chairman of the Finance Committee to meet with agencies comprising the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council and urge them to spend disaster funds now for calamity survivals. The Department of Social Welfare and Development will utilize funds for cash for work programs, which usually involve clearing of debris and other rehabilitation work in affected areas. This is good, but we can expand this to other livelihood opportunities with the help of the Department of Labor and the Technical Education and Skills Development Authority. The government, particularly the Land Bank of the Philippines, should be more proactive in providing loan assistance to Lando victims, especially for farmers, because it is during the planting season. We don't want our farmers to be victims twice over, victims of natural calamity and man's greed in the form of loans from loan sharks. According to the State Weather Bureau, we are expecting 3 to 4 more typhoons before the end of the year, and this could be as strong as Lando. I hope our agencies can efficiently utilize the Quick Response Fund in the pre-positioning of basic needs and personnel in affected communities days before the typhoons arrive. There is no excuse not to be proactive because the funds are readily available in the form of the QRF and the NDREAM Fund, amounting to tens of billions of pesos, ready to be accessed by the agencies concerned. I repeat, we have to be proactive in addressing the needs of our communities, especially in reducing disaster risks and responding swiftly to post-disaster needs, as well as in adapting to and mitigating climate change. I say this, Mr. President, as we are now in the month of COP21. Towards the end of November, delegations from 196 member states of the United Nations will gather in France to negotiate for our future, and heads of state of these countries will commit or not to commit to climate action. People have asked me, what is COP21? It is the Conference of Parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or the UNFCCC, the UN treaty that aims to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that will prevent dangerous human interference with the climate system. This year is the 21st conference, thus it is called COP21. Parties to the UNFCCC have been negotiating for more than 2 decades. But what have we agreed on so far? Heads of state pronounce sweet promises, but the true battle is on the negotiating tables, where representatives of various government agencies agree or disagree over funding and technical support for vulnerable nations and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, among many issues. The developing countries blame the developed nations for causing global warming. Developing nations are the ones most vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, while the developed countries have the responsibility and the capacity to provide assistance. COP has been, in the past years, a conference of all talk and no action. No action in the sense that the world has not done what it should have been doing the last decades to avert the climate crisis. We are now scrambling to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees Celsius. Why only now, when we could have started 20 years ago? Allow me to explain further the scenario now and other possible scenarios depending on our level of commitment and urgent climate action. The average global temperature has risen by 0.8 degrees Celsius since 1880. At this level, we are already experiencing, as we can see, unprecedented extreme weather events. And based on scientific studies, we need to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius to be able to survive, because 2 degrees Celsius is clearly destructive. COP21 aims to limit global warming to less than 2 degrees. The UNFCCC has received 154 intended nationally determined contributions, or what we call the INDCs. What are these? Simply put, Mr. President, these are country commitments for reducing greenhouse gas emissions after the year 2020. But these submissions are inadequate, as the combined commitments of all these countries, as computed now, would still lead to a 2.7 degrees Celsius global warming by the year 2030. We need to do more, and certainly we cannot go business as usual. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change predicts that with a 1.5 to 2.5 degrees Celsius rise in temperature in a span of 50 to 100 years, 30% of species would be at risk of extinction. According to the World Bank, it projects that even under a 2 degrees Celsius scenario, projections include a 20% decline in water availability for many regions and 15 to 20% decrease in crop yield. Moreover, with a warming of up to 2 degrees Celsius, sea level rise is projected to be around 70 centimeters. Sea level rise, floods that damage fish farms, increased acidification of the oceans by 2050 could reduce fish yield by 90%. If we reach 4 degrees Celsius warming, the IPCC further predicts, and I quote, severe and widespread impacts on unique and threatened systems, substantial species extinction, large risks to global and regional food security, the combination of high temperature and humidity compromising normal human activities. In fact, in a recent report in international media, it showed that Asia is already suffering from heat stress and heat wave because of increased warming of temperature. And this will clearly impact directly on productivity. These impacts can happen and is happening within our lifetime. We are talking about scenarios 15, 35, 85 years from now, all within this century. But we are already experiencing a near 1 degree Celsius rise. Our children, our grandchildren, their world will be very different from ours. Will we actually let them suffer, knowing now that we have the chance to avert a global crisis? We need urgent and aggressive climate action. Business as usual is not an option. Deep cuts in greenhouse gas emissions is a must. Nations with the capacity and resources to aid vulnerable countries must commit their support. The COP21 agreement should define with clarity how to operationalize financing for mitigation, adaptation, loss and damage, technology transfer, and capacity building. The Philippines should achieve its INDC goal of 70% greenhouse gas emissions reduction. The government must commit to this and draw sectoral roadmaps that will lead us to this goal, most especially in the energy, transport, forestry, and agriculture sectors. As a developing nation, the Philippines needs more energy, but it cannot be, and I quote, we need power at all costs, and we will develop at all costs. Some say that coal is cheap. I say coal is definitely not cheap. Coal affects our health. Coal kills biodiversity. Coal kills the environment. Coal affects our waters and pollutes the air we breathe. If we input all of these in the cost of coal, we can no longer say that coal is cheap. We are a country rich in renewable energy. The amount of sun and wind is more than enough to power our entire country many times over. We have a renewable energy law of 2008, and though we may not totally ban coal, we should have a good energy mix where there is a clear bias for renewables. This is the way Europe is going, and this is the way the world is going. I will repeat, we cannot go business as usual. It is not an option, at least if we want our children and grandchildren to live. COP21 is a crucial negotiation. But more important than the agreement is the actual action that will be taken by each nation. In closing, I wish to urge my colleagues, many of whom will be campaigning for re-election as senator, for re-election or election for higher office as president and vice president, or for local government positions. I urge you to join us to be climate advocates. Monitor the COP21 negotiations because this will affect the development agenda of the next administration. Climate change will make poverty alleviation and achieving food security increasingly difficult. New poverty traps will arise as extreme weather events becomes the new norm, and economic growth will actually slow down. We need to take urgent climate action because humanity's future depends on what we do now and what we will fail to do. Let us not make failure an option. Let us make resilience and sustainability our future. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Ligarda. Senator Juan Ponce and really the minority leaders recognized.
Mr. President, I'm interested about this topic, and I would like to ask some questions to the lady, if she will care to answer them.
Yes, of course, Mr. President, from the most veteran and perhaps the oldest and the wisest colleague in the Senate.
Never mind about those sweet words.
Please
But
proceed,
anyway,
Senator.
thank you. What are the opposing forces in this negotiation, and why?
Who are the opposing forces
Yes.
in this negotiation
Who and
why?
what are the opposing forces, and why?
Mr. President, it's all the nations of the world who are members of the United Nations, because the UNFCCC received the commitments from all these countries, Mr. President, but clearly it is the developing nations who have committed to, and the developed nations who have committed to come up with a Green Climate Fund in 2009 in Copenhagen, but which has not operationalized this fund to assist developing nations.
Who are these developed nations in the first place?
China, India, United States, the U.S. first, and then developing China and India.
The BRICS?
Yes, Mr. President.
The BRICS?
Brazil. Yes, you remember. When you say BRICS, you're referring to Brazil, India, China, etc.
Correct.
Russia.
Yes, Mr. Russia.
And do you think you can solve this problem without the cooperation of these countries?
Oh, we need the cooperation of everyone, Mr. President. In fact,
No, I'm pointing to these countries actually.
yes,
The
Mr.
developed
President.
countries are the culprits in this.
You're correct, Mr. President. I agree with you. That is, I'm not in disagreement with you. Yes, in fact, I'm speaking in behalf of the vulnerable country that we live in, and even if we do all the mitigation, it is these countries who have polluted the world that must own up to the responsibility.
Why should the Philippines comply? And if the Philippines comply with what is required, would that solve the problem of climate change? If,
Mr. President.
If the BRICS will not cooperate?
It is not an option because they will cooperate, Mr. President. In Paris this year, there will be an ambitious climate agreement that will be reached. Mr. President, we are a non-emitter, less than 1%. I get your drift by saying that even if we mitigate, it will not create a dent in the total global greenhouse gas emissions in the world. However, what I'm saying is that we must adapt to extreme weather events. It also makes good business sense to mitigate, because mitigation as a function and adaptation serves our country well in terms of health, environment, business, and livelihood, Mr. President.
By the way, Madam, do you know how many vehicles are emitting oxides in China?
The number of vehicles I may not know, but the amount of pollution that China delivers to the world, yes, more than 20%.
How about in the Philippines? How many vehicles do we have?
I don't know the number of vehicles, Mr. President, but we are less than a 1% emitter, Mr. President.
This is the problem. This has been going on for decades, not just 2, 3, 4 years or 5 years ago. It has been going on. And for how long do you think do we have to negotiate to be able to solve this problem and reach a level of temperature that is ideal for humanity to survive?
I understand what you're saying. The Philippines may be not a major player because we are not a major emitter. It is China, the United States, India, and other countries. However, because we are the top 3 most vulnerable in the world, we must engage the world. We must make nations commit to reducing their greenhouse gas emissions so that we do not exceed the 1.5 degrees Celsius for global GHG.
Well, all I can say, Madam, is good luck to you. Good luck to you.
I thank you for your wishes of good luck, Mr. President, and I hope that we see within our lifetime the developed nations who have polluted the world will commit to a less than 2 degrees Celsius of global greenhouse gas emissions in the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Legarda, the Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I move that we refer the speech of Senator Legarda and the interpellation thereon of Senator Enrile to the Committee on Climate Change.
So referred.
Mr. President, with the permission of the Senate, I move that we transfer Senate Bill number 2983 under Committee Report number 284 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
Approved.
With the consent of the Senate, I move that we consider Senate Bill number 2983 under Committee Report number 284, Mr. President.
Any objection? None, in order.
With the permission of the body, Mr. President, I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
The Secretary will read the title of the measure.
An act providing for the delineation of the specific forest lands limits of the public domain and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I move that we 1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
Suspended for 1 minute.
Mr. President, I move that resume, Mr. President. Move to resume.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize Senator Legarda to sponsor this measure.
Senator Legarda is recognized to sponsor the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to sponsor Senate Bill number 29383 under Committee Report 284 with the permission of the Chairman of the Environment Committee, Senator Escudero. This was a bill which I filed in 1998, Mr. President, which I hope could pass before we adjourn in January. And Senator Serge Osmeña also signified his intention, and I make him a co-author and co-sponsor as a measure, as well as a chair of the Agriculture Committee, Senator Cynthia Villar. And Senator Cynthia Villar also wishes to co-author and co-sponsor this measure. Congress has a duty to pass legislation as part of its duty under Article 12, Section 12 of the Constitution, and I quote, "Congress shall, as soon as possible, determine by law the specific limits of forest lands and national parks, making clearly their boundaries on the ground. Thereafter, such forest lands and national parks shall be conserved and may not be increased or diminished except by law." I wish to note that despite the absence of a law, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources has completed the delineation of the specific limits of forest lands based on Presidential Decree 705. Boundaries between permanent forests and alienable and disposable lands have been clearly marked and maintained on the ground. We have demarcated and properly identified forest lands. The national government can better plan the utilization of the natural resources of the country, and local government units will be better equipped to initiate and implement development projects and programs with due regard to the preservation and protection of the integrity of the demarcated forest lands. Mr. President, please allow me to set out the following reasons for the need to immediately pass this bill. The Forest Limits Act aims to achieve, among others, a defined forest land boundary which is expected to resolve conflict among the competing uses of forest lands, agricultural lands, and natural parks. security of tenure through issuance of land titles to upland dwellers or actual tillers of forest lands, released or agricultural lands, enhancement, development, administration, supervision, and protection of forest lands, improvement of revenue collection from forest lands through the issuance of appropriate tenurial instruments and agricultural lands through collection of realty taxes. Private-public partnership in forest development, decrease in forest degradation caused by illegal occupancy, fake and illegal titling, unlawful land use conversion, and timber poaching. Accurate information on forest limits that will help in the decision-making and planning process of proper land use in crafting a cohesive roadmap to national development, and defined forest land boundary which can be used as reference in the preparation of comprehensive land use plan or the CLUP by the LGUs as required under RA 7160 or the Local Government Code of 1991. This measure aims to achieve these targets by identifying what constitutes the forest lands, providing guidelines in determining the specific limits of forest lands, creating the National Review and Evaluation Committee, adopting an evaluation system, creating an adjudication board, and creating a congressional oversight committee to oversee the implementation of the law. It is worth stressing that the delineation of the permanent forest line is key to the establishment and implementation of a sustainable development plan for the country's forest resources. Let this measure be our lasting contribution to our children, our grandchildren, and the generations to come. On this note, I call on our colleagues in this august chamber for your support to this very important measure which operationalizes by law a major constitutional provision. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2983 under Committee Report number 284.
Suspended.
Mr. President, may I ask for a 1-minute suspension?
1 minute suspension.
Mr. President, ready to resume.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, before we go on with the other aspects of our agenda, we would like to acknowledge the students and teachers from Philippine Science High School main campus, headed by Mr. Charles de Guzman, their social science teacher.
The students and teachers from the main campus of the Philippine Science High School, we are recognized. Their presence is made of record. We welcome them to the Senate. And this group is headed by Mr. Charles de Guzman, their social science teacher. Welcome to the Senate.
Mr. President, with the permission of the Senate, I move that we transfer Senate Bill number 2987 under Committee Report number 285 from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders.
Any objection? Hearing none, so transferred.
With the consent of the body, Mr. President, I move that we consider Senate Bill number 2987 under Committee Report number 285.
In order.
With the permission of the body, I move that the Secretary read only the title of the measure.
Secretary will read the title of the measure.
An act amending Section 109A and F of the National Internal Revenue Code as amended by Republic Act number 9337 and for other purposes.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize Senator Osmeña to sponsor the measure.
Senator Osmeña is recognized to sponsor the measure. Senator Osmeña is recognized to sponsor the measure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today as your chairperson of the Ways and Means Subcommittee on the VAT exemption for raw sugar or raw cane sugar to present before this chamber Senate Bill number 2987 under Committee Report number 285 entitled An Act Amending Section 109A and F of the National Internal Revenue Code as amended by Republic Act 9337 and for other purposes. This bill is in substitution of House Bill number 5713, which was authored by Representatives Jeffrey Ferrer, Romero Kimbo, and Georgidi Agabao, taking into consideration Senate Bill 2749, authored by this representation. What is in a word? Dear colleagues, the main issue here is really a matter of definition. How does the law define raw sugar or raw cane sugar? It may indeed be a simple matter, but for many sugar farmers, the implications would be significant. This is considering the current tax policy being implemented by the Bureau of Internal Revenue that subjects this particular agricultural product to the payment of the value-added tax or VAT. A review of our previous tax laws will show that Congress has always granted VAT exemptions to raw cane sugar, to wit, 1. Section 1 of Executive Order 273 issued on 25 July 1987, otherwise known as the original VAT law, which indicates that VAT-exempt transactions include the sale or importation in the original state of agriculture and marine food products. Food products are in their original state even if they have undergone the simple process of preparation and preservation for the market, such as freezing, drying, salting, smoking, or stripping. Polished and or husked rice, corn grits, and raw cane sugar shall be considered in their original state. End of quote. Number 2, Republic Act 7716, enacted on 5 May 1994, otherwise known as the Expanded Value-Added Tax Law, states that agriculture and marine food products in their original state has been amended to be those that even if they have undergone the simple processes of preparation or preservation for the market, such as freezing, drying, salting, smoking, or stripping, polished and or husked rice, corn grits, and raw cane sugar shall be considered in their original state. Number 3, Section 109 of the NIRC, as amended by RA 9337, enacted on 24 May 2015, otherwise known as the Reformed Value-Added Tax Law, provides that the VAT exemption on the sale or importation of agriculture and marine food products in their original state. The second paragraph clarifies that raw cane sugar and molasses, as well as polished and husked rice, corn grits, ordinary salt, and copra, as products to be in their original state. Section 109F of the same code also grants the VAT exemption of services by agricultural contract growers and milling for others of sugar cane into raw sugar. Unfortunately, despite the clear pronouncement of our laws on the tax treatment of raw sugar or raw cane sugar, the BIR has issued several regulations that veered away from the definition of raw sugar or raw cane sugar and effectively removed the VAT exemption of this vital agricultural product. Needless to say, the revenue regulations have wreaked havoc on the sugar industry. The revenue regulation that started all this controversy was Revenue Regulation 13-2013, which provided that raw sugar only refers to Muscovado sugar. Thus, all other types of sugar that have undergone the centrifugal process of producing sugar are no longer exempt from VAT. The BIR also issued several revenue regulations this year that provides that various definitions of raw sugar and raw cane sugar, all with the intention of removing the VAT exemption of this agricultural product. Under Revenue Regulations number 8-2015, the BIR adopted 3 criteria in classifying raw cane sugar for the purposes of VAT exemption, and these are: 1. Only one stage of filtering and centrifugal process; 2. Color is greater than 800 ICU; and 3. A polarimeter reading of less than 99.5%. Sugar is a basic commodity, widely recognized and used not just in our country but in all parts of the world. As a globally traded product, it is natural that world standards were set and are being followed by nations engaged in the international trade of this essential commodity. For this purpose, there are 2 widely accepted and recognized authorities: the World Customs Organization and the Codex Alimentarius, or the Food Code. The WCO, or the World Customs Organization, defines raw sugar as sugar whose content of sucrose by weight in the dry state corresponds to a polarimeter reading of less than 99.5%. This definition was adopted in the Philippine Tariff and Customs Code and the ASEAN Harmonized Tariff Nomenclature. On the other hand, the Codex states that raw cane sugar is partially purified sucrose, which is crystallized from partially purified cane juice without further purification, but which does not preclude centrifugation or drying, which is characterized by sucrose crystals covered with a film of cane molasses. This definition of raw cane sugar is adopted in toto in the Philippine National Standards on Raw Sugar. Given the above definition, our local sugar industry has understood that raw sugar or sugar produced in sugar mills is included within the scope of raw cane sugar. It maintains that raw sugar, as used by the local industry, is one and the same as raw cane sugar as provided in revenue regulations. Mr. President, there is an urgent need to remove all the ambiguity surrounding the definition of what is considered as raw sugar or raw cane sugar for the purposes of VAT exemption. It is the submission of this representation that it would be for the best interest of our entire economy if a single criterion be adopted in defining the basic commodity. This will make our law on sugar at par with international standards, where only the 99.5% polarization standard is used and does not refer to any color or even to the processes as a measure to define raw sugar or raw cane sugar. With this in mind, Senate Bill number 2967, as covered by Committee Report number 285, aims to amend Section 109A of the National Internal Revenue Code as amended by inserting a new paragraph defining raw sugar and raw cane sugar, to wit: for purposes of this section, the term raw sugar means sugar whose content of sucrose by weight in the dry state corresponds to a polarimeter reading of no less than 99.5%, and the term raw cane sugar refers to partially purified sucrose, which is crystallized from partially purified cane juice without further purification, but which does not preclude centrifugation or drying, which is characterized by sucrose crystals covered with a film of cane molasses. End of quote. It is undeniable that raw cane sugar cannot be different in this country as in the rest of the world. The proposed amendment provides the needed clarification that raw sugar, as used in the local sugar industry, is the same as the raw cane sugar provided in the tax code. Congress has always recognized the importance of granting tax exemption to certain sections by reason of public policy and the social justice principle enshrined in our Constitution. VAT exemptions have been granted by Congress and even by the Supreme Court to the agricultural sector precisely to encourage agricultural production and to prevent the rise in cost of basic food and other essential provisions for the sake of the general public. Indeed, the bottom line when it comes to granting VAT exemptions is to spare our less fortunate kababayans from any additional tax burdens or from the incidence of VAT, especially for basic commodities like food, medical, and educational services. At present, there are about 420,000 hectares of sugar lands, and most of these are under the Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program of CARP. This means that about 76% of the sugar farmers are small farmers and having only 5 hectares of land and below. Those that were badly hit and affected by the sudden imposition of VAT on raw sugar or raw cane sugar other than Moscovado were our small farmers. These small farmers suffered a significant decrease in their net income as a result of the BIR regulations. Also based on the Sugar Master Plan for 2010 to 2015, the sugar industry will employ about 700,000 individuals. This will be the people that would be affected, for better or for worse, by any policy implemented by the government that concerns the sugar industry. According to the BIR, the estimated foregone revenue that would result from the enactment of this measure is 1.4 billion. Mr. President, this representation believes that the BIR can easily recapture the VAT down the line for what that is the way that this elegant tax works. To illustrate, when this raw sugar or raw cane sugar is used as an ingredient to make other products and is further subjected to other processes, then the end commodity becomes subjected to VAT. The BIR does not lose here, nor will our government coffers suffer from the grant of this VAT exemption. In fact, the grant of this tax exemption would create a multiplier effect that would ultimately redound to the benefit of our country and people. Mr. President and my dear colleagues, the BIR found a loophole in our law and interpreted it in such a way that would allow them to collect more taxes from the sugar industry. The correct and proper response in this situation is not to cast blame on the BIR. Rather, I urge our fellow legislators to take action and plug this loophole through the adoption of this proposed measure. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of Senate Bill number 2987 under Committee Report number 285.
Suspended.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to the calendar for special orders the following: House Bill number 5531 under Committee Report number 258, House Bill number 5532 under Committee Report number 259, House Bill number 5391 under Committee Report number 260, House Bill number 5226 under Committee Report number 261, and House Bill number 5227 under Committee Report number 262, Mr. President.
So transferred.
Mr. President, with the permission of the Senate, I move that we consider on second reading, under one omnibus sponsorship, the House bills that I have previously enumerated, as reported out under their respective committee reports, all of which, Your Honor, are franchise bills.
The Chamber just approved the motion to transfer from the calendar for ordinary business to special orders the enumerated House bills. I think an appropriate motion to place it in the to consider these measures is in order first before the motion for
That's right. I stand corrected, Mr. President. So, Mr. President, with that, I move that we consider the aforementioned House bills.
Any objection? Hearing none, consideration of the House bills enumerated is in order.
And with the permission of the body, Mr. President, I move that the Secretary read only the titles of the proposed bills without prejudice to inserting into the record the whole text thereof.
All right. The Secretary is directed to read the titles of the said measure.
House Bill number 5531, an act renewing the franchise granted to the Radio Mindanao Network, Inc. under Republic Act Number 3122 as amended by Republic Act Number 6980 for another 25 years from the date of approval of this Act. House Bill Number 5532, an Act renewing the franchise granted to the Interactive Broadcast Media, Inc. under Republic Act Number 8210 to another 25 years from the date of approval of this Act. House Bill Number 5391, an Act amending the franchise of Aliw Broadcasting Corporation granted under Republic Act Number 7399 and renewing / extending the term thereof to another 25 years from the effectivity of this Act. And House Bill Number 5226, an Act renewing for another 25 years and the franchise granted to Christian Era Broadcasting Service International Incorporated as provided under Republic Act Number 7618. And House Bill Number 5227, an Act renewing for another 25 years the franchise granted to Eagle Broadcasting Corporation as provided under Republic Act Number 7299.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we recognize Senator Osmeña to deliver an omnibus sponsorship speech for all of the House bills enumerated.
There is a motion that Senator Osmeña be recognized to deliver a joint sponsorship speech for all the franchise bills under consideration. Any objection? Hearing none, Senator Osmeña is allowed to deliver a single sponsorship speech for all the franchise bills under consideration.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, I rise to present for the Senate's approval 5 House bills seeking the renewal of term for another 25 years of 5 existing franchises for radio and/or television broadcast services. These bills are as follows. House Bill Number 5531, covered by Committee Report 258, entitled An Act Renewing the Franchise Granted to the Radio Mindanao Network Incorporated under Republic Act 3122 as amended by Republic Act 6980 for another 25 years from the date of approval of this Act, introduced by Congressmen Abayon, Teodoro, Alipin, et al. Number 2, House Bill Number 5532, covered by Committee Report 259, entitled An Act Renewing the Franchise Granted to the Interactive Broadcast Media, Inc. under Republic Act 8210 to another 25 years from the date of approval of this Act, introduced by Congressmen Abayon, Teodoro, and Alipin. Number 3, House Bill Number 5391, covered by Committee Report 260, entitled An Act Amending the Franchise of Aliw Broadcasting Corporation granted under Republic Act 7399 and renewing, extending the term thereof to another 25 years from the date of effectivity of this Act, introduced by Congressmen Gonzales, Bichara, Tambunting, et al. Number 4, House Bill Number 5226, covered by Committee Report 261, entitled An Act Renewing for another 25 years the franchise granted to Christian Era Broadcasting Service International Incorporated as provided under Republic Act 7618, introduced by Representatives Belmonte, Gonzales, Teodoro, et al. Number 5, House Bill Number 5227, covered by Committee Report 262, entitled An Act Renewing for another 25 years the franchise granted to Eagle Broadcasting Corporation as provided under Republic Act Number 7618, introduced by Representatives Belmonte, Gonzales, Teodoro, et al. Mr. President, radio and television continue to deliver effective means of educating our people, keeping them informed despite the advancement of the Internet as our primary data bank of information. Broadcast media is particularly important in areas where reliable Internet connection is lacking. It is in this light, Mr. President, that your Committee on Public Services recommends the renewal of term of these franchises for radio and/or television broadcast services. Each is for a period of 25 years, subject to amendment, alteration, or repeal by Congress when the common good so requires. The committee has examined and evaluated all corporate documents submitted by each applicant and found them to have complied with the requirements prescribed by law. No objection was interposed by the Securities and Exchange Commission during the committee hearing conducted for the purpose of ascertaining the qualifications of the applicants. The National Telecommunications Commission, which exercises regulatory supervision over the applicants, did not also object to the passage of these measures. All applicants have complied with the ownership and management requirement under Section 11, Article 16 of the Constitution, which mandates that ownership and management of mass media shall be limited to citizens of the Philippines or to corporations, cooperatives, or associations wholly owned and managed by such citizens. The continued operation of these radio and television franchises will benefit our people by generating additional jobs and creating career opportunities for our media practitioners. This also supports our objective of providing our people with additional access to information to help them in their daily economic activities and personal choices. The approval of the aforementioned bills as amended by the Senate is thereby earnestly sought. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Zubanya.
Mr. President, I move that we suspend consideration of House Bill numbers 5531, 5532, 5391, 5226, and 5227 under Committee Reports numbers 258, 259, 260, 261, and 262.
So suspended.
I ask for a 1-minute suspension, Mr. President.
Suspended for 1 minute.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I
Can
move...
we resume first the session?
Yes, Mr. President. I move to resume.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of House Bill number 5842 under Committee Report number 213. This is the bill on Social Security, Mr. President.
Any objection to the consideration of the measure is in order.
Mr. President, the parliamentary status of the measure is that the sponsor already delivered the sponsorship speech last August 26, 2015. I thus move, Mr. President, that we open the period of interpellation.
Period for interpellation is in order.
Mr. President, I move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Cynthia Villar.
Senator Villar is recognized.
Mr. President, no senator has manifested intention to interpellate. May I move now that the period of interpellation be closed?
Senator Soto.
Yes, Mr. President, for the record, I think the minority leader has already placed on record his thoughts on the measure. On my part, I have no interpellations. May I just be made a co-author by the sponsor, Mr. President?
Sorry, what was the... Yes, what...
So we accept, Mr. President.
I didn't... as co-author?
Yes, Mr. President.
Yes.
Co-sponsor, yes. And of course, I wish also to acknowledge the other co-sponsors of the bill, Senator Chupisto Gingona III, Senator Joseph Victor Ejercito, Senator Ralph Recto, Senator Ferdinand Marcos, Senator Jingo Estrada, Senator Francis Escudero, Senator Ramon Bong Revilla. Okay. That's all, Mr. President.
Mr. President, there's a motion to close the period of interpellations.
Any objection? Hearing none, period for interpellation is terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period of committee amendments.
Period for committee amendments is in order.
Mr. President, I think there's no committee amendment. We adopted the version of the House.
Mr. President, I move that we close the period of committee amendments.
Committee amendments, period for committee amendments is terminated.
Mr. President, I move that we open the period of individual amendments.
Period for individual amendments is in order.
Mr. President, there are no individual amendments to the bill.
Mr. President, I move that we close. I move that we close the period for individual amendments.
Period for individual amendments is terminated.
Mr. President, 1 minute suspension, Mr. President.
1 minute suspension.
Second reading.
Mr. President, I move to resume.
Session is resumed.
Mr. President, no senators expressed their wish to propose individual amendments. Hence, we terminated the period for individual amendments already. So, Mr. President, at this point, we move to approve House Bill number 5842 under Committee Report number 213 on second reading.
Any objections? Hearing none. House Bill number 5842 under Committee Report number 213 is hereby approved on second reading.
I move, Mr. President, that we suspend consideration of House Bill number 5842 under Committee Report number 213.
So suspended.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, with the consent of the Senate, I move that we resume consideration of Senate Bill number 2894 under Committee Report number 200. This is the bill pertaining to the proposed basic law for the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, Mr. President.
Any objection? Hearing none. Approved.
Mr. President, we are still in the period of interpellations. I thus move that we recognize the sponsor, Senator Marcos.
Senator Marcos is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President.
And I also move, Mr. President, that we recognize the Minority Floor Leader, Senator Juan Ponce Enrile, to interpolate.
Senator Juan Ponce Enrile is recognized. Senator Bongbong Marcos, Senator Ferdinand Marcos Jr., principal sponsor of the measure, is recognized, and to avail of the period of interpolation, the Minority Leader, Senator Juan Ponce Enrile.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, before I start my interpellation, Mr. President, I would like to make it of record that I commend the distinguished chairman of the Committee on Local Governments for having crafted a substitute bill to what was supposedly a very controversial bill that was originally filed here. But nonetheless, I would like to ask some questions on this bill in order to clarify and perhaps improve on some of the text of the measure as proposed by the committee to the chairman. And so I will start, Mr. President. Article 1, Name and Purpose. Section 1, short title. This law shall be known and cited as the basic law for the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. And then Section 2 says name. The name of the political subdivision under this basic law shall be the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. Now my question is, what's the word Bangsa? Is this a Magindanaoan term, a Maranao term, or a Tausug term?
I believe, Mr. President, the root word is a Malay word, which we have adopted, which is part of the Tagalog dialect and now the Filipino dialect as Bansa. And it refers to nation or country.
Yes, that's why I asked, because I've traveled far and wide over a long period of time in Mindanao, and I have not heard this term, this word, among the Magindanaoans, the Yakans, the Molboks, the Iranons, the Maranaos, the Tausugs, and the Samals. So And why are we using a Malay word here, Mr. President? Who proposed this? Was this a proposal of the national government, or was it proposed by others? I'm just asking these preliminary questions because I know that Malaysia is somewhat involved in the crafting of this supposed Bangsamoro autonomous or basic law. So,
it is my understanding, Mr. President, that the terminology of bangsa, the use of the word bangsa and the use of the word Bangsamoro was a proposal made by the MILF from the MILF panel to the government of the Philippines panel during the negotiations, which resulted in the framework agreement, and finally the original version of the Bangsamoro Basic Law. The word Bangsamoro has never been used before, for the simple reason that there has never been a Bangsamoro in the history of the Republic of the Philippines. There has never been a Bangsamoro in the history of Islamic communities in the Philippines. And the reason for that is that there has never been a unifying political, tribal, traditional aggregation of all the Islamic communities in the Philippines. It has never been formed into one homogeneous group, and that is why there was no need for such a terminology, and that is why the terminology is something that is new, and was originally proposed, as I mentioned, by the MILF peace negotiators.
So the word bangsa is not a Filipino term, but a Malay term. Am I correct, Your Honor?
I believe that the word bangsa and bansa and all the related terms is a Malay is of Malay is a Malay term for nation, or it is a term for a political or maybe a tribal, homogeneous aggregation of several tribes. The implication is that there are several tribes within a bangsa, a nation.
Is it equal to the term bansa?
I believe so. I believe so, Mr. President.
Is it equal to the term tuna, iroy na tuna in Waray?
I think that it has a larger. The bangsa has a larger coverage.
Is it equal to the term pagilyan?
Pagilyan, no. Again, I think pagilyan refers to a smaller community rather than bansa.
Ili, pagilyan.
I think because the root word of pagilyan is ili, so it is just ili is town, and perhaps that is why it is used in reference to a smaller constituency or subdivision.
Just to complete, Mr. President, may I know if we know what is the term used by the Maguindanaoans for nation?
The Mindanaoans.
What is the term used by Maguindanaoans? I am afraid I am not familiar with the term that they use. I assume that it is bangsa.
What is? How about the Maranaos? How do they call a nation in Maranao?
Again, Mr. President, I am not. I do not speak the dialect. I will find out for the information of the body. Yes. And the good gentleman.
And maybe I would press further. How about the Tausugs? How would they call nation in their dialect?
There is a Tausug in the audience, maybe. the sponsor can consult.
Sasud.
I am reliably informed by Tausug that the term is Bangsasug.
Bangsasug.
That is the Tausug, in the Tausug dialect.
At least one of the tribes has used this term. How about the Yakans, if I may know?
I'm afraid I cannot provide that information, Mr. President.
I suppose you do not know also about the how the Samals would call
Again,
edition.
I am afraid that I do not know what the Samals use for the term nation.
And as well as the Iranons.
Yes, Mr. President.
And least of all, the Molboks of Balabac. Well, anyway, to proceed. Who I have never heard of a Bangsamoro word. This is an invention.
I believe that is
Am I correct?
There have been in the historical record there have been mentions of the Bangsamoro, but in a very different context, and it is just to describe again Islamic communities, but not as a political subdivision, merely as a gathering or a collection of communities. But again, the reason I believe that we have never heard of Bangsamoro because it is a word that was created that now includes a Malay term and a Spanish term, and that is why it is, I believe, specific to the Philippines because of the Spanish colonization of the Philippines and the use of the word Moro when referring to Islamic communities. This derives from their use of the word Moro when Islam came to the Iberian Peninsula, and that is when they were the dark-skinned people of the Islamic communities that took over, at least the southern part of the southern peninsula, were referred to as Moros or Moors. That is why, because of their darker skin, hence Moors. And then when the Spanish came to the Philippines, they made the same application. They applied the term Moro to the same to the Islamic communities as well. I suppose consistent with their experience. But the term Bangsa and Moro together has never been used formally, simply because there has never been a political or tribal historical subdivision that can be referred to as a Moro nation or Muslim nation. So we have never had to coin such a word before.
And now it turns out that the term Moro is not a Malay word.
I do not believe so, Mr. President.
And
I think
it's not also a word indigenous to Mindanao.
I do not think so, Mr. President. As I said, I understand it is the Spanish word for Moor.
No, that's why I make these preliminary questions, because I have a purpose to raise later on, Mr. President. And I was told that the Muslims of our country abhorred to being called Moros.
That is right, Mr. President.
They consider this very insulting word to be used against them. And if we say they are Moros, they would probably react, and they might use their Chris to for a purpose.
That is absolutely right, Mr. President. In fact, during the hearings that we had, there were several instances where some tribes other than the Magindanaoans were questioning the use of the word Moros. And one particular example, a gentleman testifying in the hearing said when they were, he is presently now a government official in Sulu, And he says that when he was in school, and somebody would call him, when his school here in Manila, and somebody would call him a Moro, he would fight them. Because as far as he was concerned, the term Moro was a demeaning one, and not one that he found acceptable. It was with some surprise, Mr. President, that the MILF chose to adopt the word Moro, because even in Spanish literature, Moro is immediately defined as something akin, something similar to barbarian, and that is why, or outsider, or so that is why it has over the years been accepted that this is not a complimentary term to be used for any person of the Islamic faith. However, that is why, as I said, it was with some surprise that when we received when the negotiations were ongoing, the terminology that was being used was for a Bangsamoro, and we would have expected that they would have disposed of it, but nevertheless, somehow MILF decided that it was time to make it official and refer to themselves as Moro.
Anyway, am I correct then in my impression that when the proponents of the BBL, the original bill proposed by the Executive Department of the government to Congress, used the term Bangsamoro, that the pejorative connotation of the word Moro no longer resentful to the Muslim population of the country?
Well, I would assume so, Mr. President, because it is they who had proposed it. Although, as I said, there still remain a number within the Muslim community who do not accept it as a complimentary term and would prefer not to be referred to as Moro.
But that is only an assumption. Has there been an actual verification whether the people that will be covered by this law will not resent the use of the term Bangsamoro?
It is not an assumption, Mr. President. The objection has been raised by many who had come to our hearings, in the hearings for this measure, who expressed again who expressed their objection to being referred to as Moro. The pejorative, as the gentleman uses, the pejorative aspect of it still remains within many people. It is a word that was used as an insult when they were younger, and I suppose that is why they, to this day, prefer to be referred to as part of the Muslim community or part of their tribe, as Tausugs, as Maguindanawans, as Maranaos, and not as Moros.
Now, both of us know that our Constitution never used this term. It uses something else. And to me, this is quite significant because we are changing the term used by the Constitution. So I will come to that afterwards in the course of my interpellation, Mr. President, because I remember that I think Section 15 to 21 of Article 10 of the Constitution speaks of Muslim Mindanao.
That is right, Mr. President. It speaks of the an autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao and also in Cordillera. But as reference to today's discussion, yes, the only term we hear is to create an autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao. That is the only term that we have.
That is the mandate to us.
That is a mandate that the Constitution imposes upon imposed upon the first Congress after its creation.
Yes. Now, just for the sake of clarity, what are the territorial and political subdivisions of the Republic of the Philippines as provided in the Constitution?
I think as defined in the Constitution, it is within the bounds as agreed in the Paris Treaty between the Americans and the Spanish. So now there are some as to the discussions because of what is happening in the West Philippine
the
Sea.
political subdivisions are stated in the Constitution. There are provinces.
Oh, I'm sorry. The political subdivisions
Yes.
are very simply the provinces, the cities, the municipalities, and the barangays. But there will be an autonomous region of the Muslim Mindanao.
That is a special provision of the Constitution.
Yes, Mr. President, that is so.
In a specific article of the Constitution. Now, Your Honor, if, and of course, being a specific mandate in the Constitution, it is placed under the general subject of local government. Am I correct?
That is right. Article 10 is entitled Local Government.
So we cannot go beyond creating a local government.
Well, the autonomous regions are still regarded as a local government.
Correct. Yeah.
Both, at least that which was eventually created, the Cordillera Autonomous Region, did not gain the approval during the plebiscite. So we are only dealing now with the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao, which, again, because it is still considered an autonomous government, and that is one of the reasons why we have had to define very, very clearly what exactly this new form of government. It is, I say new, because it is still different from the autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao. The Bangsamoro Autonomous Region is now going to be a different kind of autonomous region with certainly very different powers and possibly also different boundaries. And so it is an entirely new political subdivision, and that is what I think we are hoping or seeking to define is what exactly it means. What exactly autonomy means in terms of the context of Muslim Mindanao.
In other words, the Constitution delegated to Congress the power to create an autonomous region in a particular place in Mindanao and in the Cordilleras. And that this autonomous region, whatever it is simply a local government under the Republic of the Philippines, a political subdivision of the Republic of the Philippines.
I believe that is very clearly stated in Section 1 of Article 10, that it is one, albeit unique, kind of local government, but nevertheless a local government.
And it cannot go beyond being a local government.
Certainly not, and that is one of the problems that we had encountered, in that they had given themselves, or at least the law that was first proposed had given powers that clearly belong only to the national government.
So my question is, if that is so, why do we have to emphasize and spell out in this proposed law that the Bangsa Autonomous Region is a political subdivision when that political status is already spelled out in the Constitution?
That is, I
Just to
think,
emphasize.
we wanted to be very, very clear in writing the substitute bill, to be very, very clear that some of the observations, the objections, the concerns that had been raised, that they had taken on many of the attributes of a national government, and therefore that this was perhaps a first step to separation. That kind of assurance we felt was necessary, and that is why it is stated, it is expressly stated that the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region is a political subdivision, under the national government. I think the gentleman will find, Mr. President, that there are many instances in the substitute bill that I have filed wherein we expressly state certain aspects of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region and its government and its powers. We expressly state those so as to make it, again, although it is already made clear in the Constitution, but again, to make it very clear to all observers and to all commentators and perhaps even some of the critics that this is not a state within a state. It is perhaps the closest we can come to it is a sub-state, but an autonomous region within the national government, within the Republic of the Philippines.
Now, Mr. President, Section 15 to 21 of Article 10 of the Constitution are delegated powers. The Filipino people, being the source of powers of government, all government emanates from the consent of the governed, delegated to us the power to create an autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao and the Cordilleras. My question is Congress authorized to expand, reduce, change, or replace the delegated powers to Congress by the sovereign people, like changing the name of the political entity mentioned in Section 15 to 21 and of Article 10 of the Constitution? Can we really do that without violating the Constitution?
I believe by an act of Congress, such as changing the names and even some of the and the boundaries of political subdivisions can be changed by Congress, and we do that regularly by creating provinces. We do that by creating new congressional districts. Changing of the name is something that happens, is fairly commonplace, and I think it is well recognized that it is within the powers of Congress to do so.
In fact, Congress has exercised that power as mandated by the Constitution to create an autonomous region, and it names it as exactly as provided in the Constitution, Autonomous Region for Muslim Mindanao, because that is the mandate of the people. And so therefore, I assume that the understanding of Congress and its interpretation of that mandate of the people is that we must always call this place as an autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao and not a Bangsamoro autonomous region, because as we go along in this interpellation, I will show that we are expanding the limitations of the terms used in sections 15 to 21 of Article 10 of the Constitution by accepting the term Bangsamoro Autonomous Region.
Certainly, Mr. President, the term Bangsamoro or the term Bangsamoro Autonomous Region does not appear anywhere within Article 10, Sections 15 to 21. Merely what we have are the reference to the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao.
Now, just to clarify, Section 2, line 3. Section 2, line 3 of page 2. Of the bill, of this bill. SB number 2894 uses the phrase, this law and other related laws. What are these related laws mentioned here?
I see. Line 2 on page 2, section 2. I believe that refers to the other laws that refer to, especially to, for example, the local government code, wherein we have devolved and provided autonomy to local governments, and therefore this language has been included to restate again the principle that we are not making any implied amendments to the local government code when we are recognizing or giving powers to the Bangsamoro government that may be reserved powers of the Bangsamoro government or shared powers of the Bangsamoro government. To make it very clear that none of the autonomy, none of the devolution, none of the powers that were granted to local governments by the local government code are amended, are diminished, are lessened, are in any way. And that is again one of these instances where we chose to put the language in to make it very clear that we will not allow any violation of the local government code in terms of giving powers to the autonomous regions, the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region government. Again, to mollify those who had expressed concern that it will change the nature of the local governments that already exist that will eventually be part of the autonomous region.
Now, if assuming that we pass this law and we create this entity known as Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, will this political entity, political subdivision, be subject to the provisions of the local government code?
The local governments within the political subdivisions, as enumerated at the beginning of Article 10, the provinces, the cities, the municipalities, and barangays, none of them, none of their autonomy, none of their powers will be affected by the passage of this basic law on the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. It is one item. It was a guiding principle that we remain true to the local government code. It would seem to be it would seem to guarantee failure of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region if it was felt by the local government executives that it is to their disadvantage to be part of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region. And this is since this will undergo a plebiscite, it was felt that if we diminish the powers of the autonomous region, first of all, legally, how do we do it? because the local government code applies to all local political subdivisions. And we cannot have a special law just for the local political subdivisions within the autonomous region. And therefore, to make the law still comply with all of the provisions of the local government code, then that served as a guide, as a minimum of the powers that were granted to the autonomous region government, and without any diminution, any changes in the powers that were devolved to the local government by the national government in the local government code.
Yeah, precisely, I'm coming to this point because the way I see it, the local government units, the provinces, cities, municipalities, and barangays embraced within this territorial unit that we are creating or trying to create under this law will be hard put to determine which to obey, because there will be all overlapping authorities governing them, overlapping jurisdiction, and one may command differently from the other.
That certainly was a concern, Mr. President, and in the original draft BBL, there were certain aspects which in fact did just that, where there were provisions as to the powers of the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region government over the political subdivisions within its territory that were in conflict with the powers granted to those local governments by the local government code. I have attempted to do what we can to make sure that the local government code is still the guiding principle when it comes to the government, the local governments within the autonomous region. And I think that we have succeeded in removing any of the contrary and conflicting provisions that had originally existed in the draft BBL, those provisions that conflicted with the local government code. And again, that is why there may be a bit of we might find that some of the language is could be said to be repetitive or even redundant. But again, this was done to make the point that the local government code and the powers that it grants to local government units will not be diminished in any way whatsoever. And that was an important part, because we could not have provisions that were implied amendments to the local government code, as that would cause all kinds of confusion in the conduct of governance by other local government units.
Now, I come to Section 3 of the proposed measure. Section 3 purpose: establish the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in accordance with the provisions of the 1987 Philippine Constitution and the aspirations of the Muslim Filipinos and all indigenous cultural communities for local governance. The Constitution never contemplated to embrace the indigenous cultural communities in the ARMM, in the Autonomous Region for Muslim Mindanao. It was the Section 15 of Article 10 of the Constitution is place, religious, and ethnic specific. It says, among others, there shall be created autonomous regions in Muslim Mindanao and in the Cordilleras. In the Cordilleras, it did not say the fate of the people to be embraced. But in Muslim Mindanao, it states that it shall be applied only to Muslims. Non-Muslims are not included.
And maybe perhaps that is actually this section, the language in this section, we included indigenous cultural communities for precisely that reason. Is that what happens if we do not include them, and only to be included in the autonomous region are the Muslim Mindanaoans? What happens now to the IPs who say we were here, in fact, in Mindanao before there was Islam?
I am coming to that precisely to contest the oft-repeated claim that the area is the ancestral home of Muslims. Actually, those places are the ancestral homes of Lumads.
That is that I fully agree with the gentleman, Mr. President. It can clearly be shown, scientifically shown, that again that the Lumads and the original tribes of Mindanao had been in existence as political entities in southern Mindanao much earlier than the arrival of the Islamic faith into Mindanao.
For instance, I'll pick a place in Mindanao, Raja Buayan. Raja Buayan is now the city of General Santos. Now, was the term Raja a Islamic term?
I do not believe so, Mr. President. I believe
the term
that
Sultan is an Islamic term.
Is Sultan an Islamic term? No. Is Sultan an Islamic term? Yes, Mr. President. I am told that it is.
That too a Islamic term?
No. I do not believe so, Mr. President.
Lakan, is it a Islamic term?
I know that is not an Islamic term, Mr. President. Lakan is
Lakandula.
nobleman. It is used not only in the south but even in Luzon. I'm sorry, Mr. President, what was the last?
Lakan, for instance, Lakandula.
Lakan is not an Islamic term, Mr. President.
So in other words, the people that were ahead of Muslims in Mindanao were the Lumads. And among these Lumads, some of them converted to Islam. Am I correct in this supposition?
Some of them have converted to Islam, but many others, especially the traditional communities, have not, Mr. President.
Correct. And so they remain non-Muslim, indigenous people of Mindanao.
That is why we had to coin the term non-Muslim indigenous people,
Correct.
because the Muslims claim to also be indigenous people, whereas the Lumads say that you have to categorize us as something else because we are not Muslim, and we do not want to be part of the definition of the Bangsamoro people, and hence the term non-Islamic indigenous peoples of Muslim Mindanao.
So we must protect the rights of those non-Muslim people in the territory that will be embraced by this political subdivision that we call Bangsamoro Autonomous Region.
Certainly,
because that will cover both the non-Muslim indigenous and the Christians, the Confucians, the Hinduists, or whatever, or the religion there is.
The question arose, Mr. President, because of the following section where there is a definition of the Bangsamoro people. And in that definition of the Bangsamoro people, they are followers of the faith of provided that the foregoing profess the faith of Islam.
Correct.
And this was the objection raised by the Lumads, and says we do not profess the faith of Islam, but we are indigenous people in Mindanao. So we have to be and immediately what the inference that they made was, we have now become, if we are not Bangsamoro people, are we now to become second-class citizens in our own land? And that is why we tried to put in guarantees into the proposed measure, wherein their rights are protected. And again, the term non-Islamic indigenous peoples was created specifically so that it would be very clear that there were indigenous people in Muslim Mindanao that were not Muslim.
In other words, Bangsamoro is a term which means Muslim.
If we are to take the generally accepted usage of the term Moro, especially in the Philippines, Bangsamoro would translate into Muslim nation.
Correct. Correct. And why was it that instead of using Muslim Mindanao, they changed it to Bangsamoro? That is something that was bothering me when I was studying this.
It is something
why was there an effort to change the term, to enlarge the term being used?
It is precisely because I think that there was an attempt to expand not only territory but also powers and autonomy
and numbers
from the autonomous region Muslim Mindanao.
And numbers, numbers. They're interested in numbers.
Well, of course, Mr. President, they would like, as I said, to expand as much as possible. And I believe that this was in their view, that this was the next step from the autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao into implying perhaps more autonomy. I was not privy to the negotiations, but the information that I have received since studying the measure has shown that the reason that they did not continue to use autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao are several. One is that it was felt that was time to expand the scope of the autonomy of Muslim Mindanao, and hence no longer refer to what we have come to know as the autonomous region of Muslim Mindanao.
That's
Furthermore,
precisely what I was after, expansion,
yes.
Expansionism, and that's why I'm glad that the chairman of the committee and the sponsor of the measure has accepted that there is an effort to expand what was written in the Constitution. The term used in Article 10, sections 15 to 21 are limiting terms.
There's certainly, especially if we study closely the draft BBL, there is certainly an intention behind the writing of that measure, of that proposed measure, to expand in many ways, not only in territory, but also in powers, also in discretion, even in political matters, to expand the autonomy of the territory. In fact, we actually removed the word territory because, again, there was an implication that it was a separate territory from the Philippines. But the boundaries of the area, the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, the Bangsamoro core area.
I do not know whether the good sponsor can answer this question, and whether my understanding of the political ideology of the Quran is correct. I read somewhere that the political ideology of the Quran is one universal community, one faith, one government, and one ruler. Am I correct in this, Your Honor?
Our Quranic expert means the reference in the I am told that the reference in the Quran is ummah. which describes a Muslim community, a
Correct.
single Muslim community.
Correct. But that is Dar al-Islam. Am I correct? The Ummah is a Dar al-Islam. Yeah.
Darul Islam. Yes, that is
Okay.
correct.
Is
Mr.
that
Chair.
correct? And anything outside of Dar al-Islam is Dar al-Harb.
That is right, Mr. President. Yes.
Dar al-Harb. What is Dar al-Harb?
All the communities that exist outside Dar Islam, which is non-Islamic communities.
In other words, those are subject to conquest. Am I correct? You can ask the people who are expert in Islam.
Well, I think that I suppose that the concept was the creation of a Muslim empire.
Empire, yeah.
And should that empire, as an imperialist system,
That is embedded in the Quran.
is embodies within it expansion. Hence, you do not have an empire if you do not slowly include other communities that previously belonged outside your empire. So yes, Mr.
And anything that is within Dar al-Harb is subject to conquest. Once you are, since we are talking, no offense about this. We are talking about this academically. Once you are subjected to conquest, you are either converted. Am I correct? Converted. Or you can ask for protectionism. Correct? Or you are subject to elimination. Correct? Those are the three stages. Nothing more, nothing less. Either you are converted, subject to tributes perhaps, protection and tribute, or you are totally exterminated. That is the jihadism that we are seeing in the world today. Okay? Is that correct?
That would seem to be a proper interpretation, Mr. President.
Okay. So, if that is so, will this entity become Dar al-Islam?
I would I believe no, because it would the way that we have the way that the measure is written, it will be a pluralistic community within the autonomous region, which allows for the Christian communities and all the other whatever faiths existing in the autonomous region to continue to exist.
But the fact that we have provided in this proposed measure that the term Bangsamoro shall refer only to those people who profess Islamic faith makes it a Dar al-Islam.
It is the definition of the Bangsamoro people, but not necessarily applies to the Bangsamoro region. It does not necessarily, the definition as I understand it of the Bangsamoro people merely seeks to define who can be considered Bangsamoro people. Again, this was a very contentious issue because why was there a need to, the question that was raised was why is there a need for you to define Bangsamoro people as separate from any of the other inhabitants within Mindanao, for that matter. But again, the argument that was made was that it was merely to strengthen the identity of the Bangsamoro people and for it to be recognized, not only by Bangsamoro people themselves, but by everybody else.
That is our interpretation. But suppose they will not follow that interpretation, what will be our recourse?
I believe that if they do not follow that interpretation, they will fall foul of the law, Mr. President. They will fall foul of the law. And again, the pluralistic nature is something that we had sought to preserve.
The life of the law is not logic, but experience. So
I differ.
we better be very, very careful. How? If we cannot even handle the Mama Sapano 44 problem, how can we handle a bigger problem like this? Well, it will confront us.
Certainly, Mr. President, there are many. The context within which we are discussing this measure has become a global, a very complicated and a globalized context, and perhaps we have been a little bit blinkered when we have been discussing this, in that we have not really spoken much about the influence of the other extremist jihadist forces that are presently fighting around the world. And again, the phenomenon of ISIS is something that comes to mind, that immediately comes to mind.
Excuse me. Are you through?
Yes, sir.
Having in mind all these things that we are discussing, assuming for the sake of argument that we enact this law and create this entity, what will be the status of the indigenous people covered within the scope of the territory that we are granting to this political entity, as far as the relation to those people who profess the faith of Islam?
Well, this is something, again, Mr. President, because again, what the original language would seem to imply, that the Bangsamoro government and the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region only applies to those who profess the Islamic faith. And that is why we have tried to introduce into other provisions of the measure guarantees that maintain the rights and the privileges, the ancestral lands of the so-called Lumads, or the non-Muslim indigenous peoples within the boundaries of the autonomous region.
But maybe I give full faith and credit to the words of those people who propose this now. But they are finite. Like me, they will die someday. They will disappear. If we talk of time, a century from now, and we have this law, do you think those people will remember our debates here now? At that point, what will be the sanctions that the national government can impose upon this Bangsamoro Autonomous Region if it will not comply with the strictures and limitations and restrictions of this proposed measure? That is what I'm concerned about.
Well, the assumption is, or the principle, now rather than the assumption, because the assumption, it was not assumed at the very beginning, but the principle that we have tried to embody here is at the most fundamental level. All the inhabitants within and without the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, whatever their tribal or ethnic or religious color should be, are citizens of the Philippines, and with the attendant rights and privileges that every citizen enjoys. But again, if we are talking specifically about the Lumans, we have asked for their protection the EPIRA law, and again we have sought to introduce guarantees that at the very least that none of the privileges, none of the recognitions of ancestral lands, for example, none of the rights on those lands by the Lumads is as granted and as stated in the IPIRA law will be diminished or violated in any way.
Yeah. Now, we'll go on, and so that they will not say that we are delaying this. As I said, Section 15, Article 10 of the Constitution is place, religious, and ethnic specific. It says, among others, there shall be created autonomous regions in Muslim Mindanao and in the Cordilleras. Section 15 of Article 10 of the Constitution speaks of Muslim and Mindanao and Cordilleras and nothing more. It does not mention, much less include, indigenous cultural communities except those in the Cordilleras. Under what authority then can Congress broaden the power delegated to it by the sovereign people?
I believe that my reading of the language is that the distinctive historical and cultural heritage, economic and social structures, other relevant characteristics apply not only to the Cordilleras, but also to Muslim Mindanao. However, because it speaks of Muslim, then we are addressing merely the Muslim area, what is commonly accepted to be the Muslim areas in Mindanao, and that is why the Constitution has already introduced a distinction from the Cordilleras, in that the followers of the Islamic faith are specifically mentioned, and that their autonomy is guaranteed by that mandate that is granted Congress by Section 15.
Bear in mind that the Constitution is very specific in terms of the faith involved, the ethnicity involved, and the powers to be granted. That's how they were aware of the political implication of what they are providing in the Constitution, the framers of this Constitution. And that is why they were very careful in using terms that limits the meaning. So anyway, I just want to get the reaction of the author so that they will be recorded for the consideration of future interested parties who may be involved in interpreting what we are doing today. My problem here is, where does Congress draw its authority to transcend? We are transcending actually the limits of the power delegated to us by the sovereign people. How can we do this?
Certainly,
this is my problem.
There have been, in the original, certainly in the draft Bangsamoro Basic Law, it has been pointed out several times by many constitutionalists and legal experts that yes, there have been, there were areas where clearly there was an attempt to go beyond the powers as granted in the creation of the autonomous region. We have tried in the substitute bill to bring it back in line so that the bill is once again legal.
Now, the Section 4 opens with a sentence which says, "Those who at the time of conquest and colonization of the Philippines by the Spaniards considered themselves natives or original inhabitants of Mindanao, whether of mixed or full blood, provided that the foregoing profess the faith of Islam shall have the right to identify themselves as Bangsamoro. The spouses and their descendants at their option shall also be a part of the Bangsamoro region. This provision shall not in any way derogate from the provisions of Article 4 of the 1987 Constitution. May I know the meaning of this Section 4?
It should say Bangsamoro people, not Bangsamoro colonization.
My problem here is we're going back into history, and how can we possibly know the feeling and choice of the natives of Mindanao at the time of conquest and colonization of the Philippines by the Spaniards at this time in our present era? And then there are many people who will be affected, even the spouses, who are the mixed bloods, full blood, who are the full blood and the mixed blood. How do we determine whether a person has mixed blood or full blood? Can you distinguish one blood from another blood?
It probably refers to, Mr. President, to the genealogy of the individual, as whether they can show some connection to a accepted Muslim individual, and by consanguinity or by affinity, The reason, I think, also is that it is, again, it had been conceived, or the explanation given to us that it was conceived, the section was conceived merely to strengthen the identity of the Bangsamoro, not to provide them with any special privileges, any greater powers, any difference in rights and privileges as enjoyed by any other citizen of the Philippines.
You know, my problem with the wording of this section is that those who at the time of the conquest and colonization of the Philippines by the Spaniards considered themselves natives or original inhabitants of Mindanao. In other words, there is a tendency to cover the entire Mindanao. This.
Quite so, and in fact, as a matter of fact, Mr. President, it also, the original included Palawan.
Yeah.
In the description of the Bangsamoro peoples, and again, that was rejected because that description was rejected because there was no way to actually determine, even the present inhabitants who do profess the Muslim faith, that they can clearly show that they have been their families or their bloodline extends back to the period of Spanish colonization. When we asked, how do you now determine who are the Bangsamoro people? Well, that is something for each individual to determine for themselves whether or not they would like to be self-ascribed as themselves as Bangsamoro people. And again, it was just included to strengthen the identity of the Muslims in Muslim Mindanao.
You know, and then the last sentence deals with citizenship, because Article 4 of the 1987 Constitution deals with, I think, with the citizens of the Republic. So this can confuse the mind, and if we are no longer around, interpreting this provision might, if this provision is not well crafted and clarified well, then it could be a subject of discord and conflict again.
In fact, that is why the last sentence was something that we included, to make it very clear that all inhabitants, all of the possibly those that will be included as Bangsamoro people, and anyone else who are not included Bangsamoro people will still be considered citizens of the Philippines, again, with their attendant rights and privileges.
Spouses and their descendants. If the husband and the wife are both Islamic, then there's no problem. If the one of the couple is an indigenous person and Islamic believer, then you start to have a problem. Or if they are Christian and Muslim, the possibility of intermarriage in the past, then there will be a problem.
And that's why I believe that is why it has been left open-ended, and it states spouses and their descendants at their option, and hence the individual, as I described before.
As I told you before, either you are converted or you become a slave, or no more slavery, no? Or you pay tribute, or you are exterminated. That is the doctrine. Oh.
But again, the fundamental principle underlying all of this is the acceptance of the Islamic, of those who are following the Islamic faith in the Philippines, that they are, in fact, not part of a separate state, not part of a separate political entity, but are citizens of the Republic of the Philippines.
You become a Bangsamoro only if you believe in the Islamic faith.
By this description, that is correct, Mr. President.
Yeah. So this is the Muslim Mindanao. But then they embrace people who are non-believer of the Islamic faith. So this is an expansion that is, I think, unauthorized by the Constitution.
The former professors have the right to identify.
Mr. President, I think I will stop my interpellation for now. I will come to Article 2 of the Bangsamoro identity on Monday.
Well, thank you, Senator Enrile. We therefore suspend consideration of Senate Bill 2894 under Committee Report number 200. And Senator Enrile has manifested he will continue his interpellation on Monday, November 9.
Mr. President.
So suspended. The Assistant Minority Leader.
Yes, Mr. President, for the record, I was informed by the Minority Leader that, yes, he will continue on Monday, and as much as possible, he would want to finish without any interference from any of us. That's why I will suspend my interpellation until he finishes. I was informed that Senator Miriam Santiago wishes to interpellate also next week, but we will try to get in touch with their office so that we can coordinate the proper day.